Hero here for Umbra Games with a review of Vikings Wolves of Midgard, played on PlayStation 4 for the review, also available on Xbox One and PC. It's always a little strange when you discover a full $60 title with a release date only a couple weeks in the future and no marketing materials or even a Wikipedia page in existence. Thus how I discovered Games Farm's Norse mythology-based isometric action RPG. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I love that the Unity game engine makes development easier for new startups and indie companies. Asking $60 for a game developed on it just feels like a bit much, and apparently I wasn't alone because the price did drop fairly quickly. Vikings Wolves of Midgard has you creating a character and jumping in to help defend and rebuild the village of Ulfung, which the frost giant armies destroy in the first sequence of the game, and try to prevent the Norse mythology end of the world, Ragnarok. Wolves of Midgard is an isometric action RPG, or dungeon crawler as they're often referred, with some easy comparisons to be made to games like Diablo 3 and Path of Exile. You move your character with the left stick, roll with the right stick, and use X for your basic attack. Special moves are mapped to the face buttons and R2 and R1. The village of Ulfung is your hub world, and you access new missions, or raids as they're called, by using the longboat or eventually a portal. The raids have one to several main objectives, and always have 3 side objectives. Finding hidden iron skulls is always present, and then a combination of killing X number of a specific enemy and destroying Y number of a structure or totem. Completing the side quest during the mission gives you materials or gold as a reward upon completion. The game's maps are set in varying environments, from beaches to swamps to icy mountains, graveyards to darker or more fiery realms outside of Midgard. There are several checkpoints littered around each map from which you will respawn if you die. The game does feature online and local co-op, and if your party dies, it can be resurrected on the spot after a decently long hold of the X button. If everyone dies, then you'll respawn from the checkpoint. Respawning doesn't just take you back in location, but also in progress, meaning anything you've killed or claimed seems to be unkilled and unclaimed when you resume. Maps also hold shrines that can be touched for temporary boosts to stats, as often found in this genre, and you can find a leveling altar usually once per stage as well. Healing works a little differently than normal. You have a healing item that can be equipped that has a number of uses, generally 2 to 3. Once those charges are expended, they can be replenished by finding a healing well on the map. Once a well has been used, it does take a while for it to rejuvenate, and often not worth hanging around for the recharges, but will top off your current life bar instead. There are a couple of different puzzle mechanics you'll come across, including matching up runes, but for the most part it's just hacking and slashing through and eliminating a boss. Some levels introduce environmental hazards where, for example, you're out in the cold and your frost meter will begin filling up, and when it does, you start losing life. You have to find campfires in order to reduce the meter, pacing yourself carefully through the map. There's a bit of character customization you can do for appearance, as well as choosing a male or female. Character classes in Vikings works a little bit differently than usual. There are 5 skill trees whose bonuses and abilities only activate based on the weapon you have in your hand. I went with Skathy, who governs the bow and arrow tree, and Hercules went for the Loki tree of dual-wielding melee. As you kill enemies, they will often drop blood, which, when collected, acts as experience points. When you have enough blood, you can sacrifice it at an altar and advance your character level, increasing your base statistics, as well as giving you some points into an additional stat, like attack power or attack speed, as well as 2 gift points to spend in the tree of your choosing. Now, you're fairly restricted on where you put your gift points on a given tree. Each node can be upgraded to 3 as you get the altar upgraded as well, but all have level restrictions. By the time you reach, I think it was level 31, I think you can have the entirety of one tree unlocked. There are 6 active skills available on each tree, and quite a few passive bonuses, like increased elemental resistance, knockdown ability on arrows, or movement speed. So, limited customization on the way up the tree, and then as I mentioned, nodes are only active when you're using the weapons for that tree, further limiting your ability to build a unique character. Each of your skills are on individual cooldowns, and can only be used when you have enough stamina, the tiny yellow bar above your skills in the lower left corner, which is depleted by rolling and using abilities. Unlike some other games in this genre, the active skills, aside from upgrading their power a bit when you're allowed to, don't really offer much variation or customization. You can get into good, useful rotations of your abilities, which is pretty fun to explore and optimize. I had several points in the game, being the archer, where my projectiles would kind of just seem to stop for no apparent reason. There was a change in topography, stopping them really wasn't readily apparent. There were other times both Hercules and myself struggled with enemy animation collision as well. The rolling to evade would clearly show your character out of the path of the threat, yet you'd still end up taking damage. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if some of this was limited to the online cooperative mode of this game only, as it kind of felt like a tagged-on afterthought to please players rather than something architected from the beginning, but more on that in a minute. Characters also have a rage mode, which fills from taking and administering damage. It's kind of difficult to tell the full implications of your rage mode. My character seemed to perform critical hits constantly, and perhaps fire her bow a little bit faster. There are some passive skill tree nodes that enhance your character's performance during rage as well, though. The raids themselves don't have level recommendations, and the best you can do is check the enemy levels after you enter. When a raid is completed, you can often revisit the territory with a mission name like Hunt Wolves or Hunt Trolls, where you complete it by its namesake, killing X number of wolves or trolls. These revisits seem to be static at the level they open to you, which also isn't obvious unless you enter and do the enemy check. It seems as though enemies award the same experience points no matter what level you are relative to them, which most of the time I can be good with, but it presents a bit of awkwardness in Vikings. We didn't feel much benefit from redoing the raid maps that were available, but as we proceeded through the game, we began to steadily fall behind the level of the enemies, just playing on normal difficulty. As we approached the final stage, that gap had widened to 7 or 8 levels, and enemies started to hardly take damage, and kill us in 1 or 2 hits. We took a couple of hours and redid the most recently available raid a few times to close that gap to 3 or 4 levels, pretty much instantly wiped out everything in our paths at that point. This made it difficult to keep the game at the right challenge level. Without relative experience of gaining extra blood for having the fortitude to kill enemies of a higher level than we were, it slowed down the pace of the game as well as kept our rate of falling behind constant. Vikings offers an arena mode with some varying tiers of difficulty that rewards you for how long you can survive against 5 waves of enemies. The enemies didn't seem to drop blood here, so it's not really useful for grinding, but each wave you survive promises a reward of some kind. Now, equipment plays a little part in your survivability as well. Your character can equip a helmet and a chest piece, as well as a ring, belt, and accessory. There's also a consumable trinket slot that can be equipped and used in battle to various results. Gear can be found in chests and dropped by enemies in varying qualities with random bonuses. There are some smiths in Ulfung that can open basic recipes for each of the armor classes. You then give them money and materials and they'll make a varying quality item also with random bonuses. It did seem more often than not the drops we got in a level were plentiful and useless, meaning after the completion of every level, dismantling a ton of items through the vendors. The tiers of gear are locked by level cap, and there were times that the gap felt huge, getting a piece of armor at 17 and it being the best you can find until 26 unlocked the next tier. Part of the drive for players in games like this is the hope and joy of constant upgrades. Some gear has slots for runes that can be added to boost stats, but only one of each kind, regardless of power tier at a time, meaning you can't stack a couple of movement bonus runes in the same piece of gear. I found the equipment screen to be a bit awkward in that you have to hold the stick in one of the directions to access a slot, and it wasn't quite as responsive as I would have liked. When you're on the full menu, there are 10 different directions to hold, and finding that sweet spot can be annoying. Obviously not a major issue or a game breaker, just an observation. Developer Games Farm briefly touches on the village building aspect of this game that could have really been a great mechanic were it not so constrictive. The iron and wood and jotun yarn you collect from various sources can be used to upgrade the vendors and the altar, but you're barricaded behind story progression, needing a one-off item that comes from a story quest to advance the blacksmith, and the armorsmith requires the blacksmith to be upgraded first. Each shop can go up to level 5 by the time you're done. Even if you could upgrade early though, if you're behind the level you're supposed to be, which we always were, we couldn't use the items available from that upgrade immediately. The altar being upgraded to level 2 and 3 stops you from putting the multiple points into a node on top of the level restriction that node had anyway. Again, another way the player is forcefully restricted. There's also a choice you can make when you conquer a few raids early on where you demand contributions from the village you spare. And to be honest, by the end of the game I'd forgotten about this mechanic completely. I think some simulation built into a game like this could have been fun and unique, and it's like there were some preliminary thoughts to it to be implemented, but not refined. Now, back to the online connectivity issues I mentioned, the player that joins the host doesn't get any story progress that they make while in the host's game. They can't contribute materials to rebuilding the village, and often Hercules' side quests wouldn't track progress as we completed them. More and more often later in the game, he couldn't equip gear he had found as drops. We did find a workaround where he would just trade the item to me and then I could trade it back to him, and then usually he'd be able to equip it with no problem. Our first couple of gaming sessions, we got disconnected mid-level quite a few times. Sometimes it would just boot him, and sometimes it would crash both of us. Now, one other oddity with this game is the presence of a slaying bonus stat. Occasionally a weapon would have it, but the archer skill tree has a spreading arrow shot that seemed to be imbued with it as well, although the description said it only worked on weaker enemies. It was kind of fun to watch, but that stat did not seem to be limited to weaker foes, as we'd laugh as it'd trigger on a boss with half of his health left or more. Once Hercules got it on one of his weapons, we'd try to deduce which one of us actually had it proc. It's a bit difficult to tell where the replay value was supposed to come from in this game. Being able to master multiple skill trees and have them active in an ever-increasing difficulty curve would be ideal, but Game Plus starts you over again once you finish the game, with your current level and gifts, meaning once you hit 31 with that class, the only power increase you'll be receiving is through base stats via leveling. You could put points in other trees, but unless you're ready for a full changeover in class, it won't do much for you. The slight monotony of the 30-hour playthrough, starting over with skills for a class every time, doesn't seem like a selling point for most people that I know that worship this genre. Now, that's not to say the game isn't enjoyable. It has very diverse environments, 5 different but kind of limited customization classes, no choice in active skills that can still take some strategy though to optimize rotation, lots of content in the campaign, with a great setting, steeped in more than just the surface of Norse mythology. There's an online co-op for up to 4 that does have its issues. There are some problems with animation and collisions from enemies and players that use projectiles. But there's extensive maps with side content to hunt, and a couple of village building mechanics that could have been unique if just fleshed out a bit more. Rated as an action RPG dungeon crawler, Vikings Wolves of Midgard hits a 49 out of 100 on a true 1 to 100 scale, with 50 being an average game. This is Giro for Umbra Games. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for notifications of new videos, and if you like what you see here, tell your friends. I'm also on Twitter, @Umbra Games.